Cut. Okay. Cut. Hi there. Cut again.
You got me like
Hi there. In today's episode, we'll be discussing categories of conscience. Our conscience could be categorized into several types. Sometimes our conscience could be right or wrong. Sometimes our conscience, when it's an error, could judge an action that might not really be wrong as something that is wrong, or it could also judge our actions to be right even though it's wrong. So let's look into the different types or categories of conscience. The first category of conscience is doubtful conscience. Some people might start with a different one, but I'll start with a doubtful conscience. What is a doubtful conscience? A doubtful conscience is a kind of conscience wherein one could not decide whether the act that was done or is about to be done is right or wrong. This one requires that the person seeks or consults someone who might know whether the action is right or wrong. So that's simple. By the word doubt, it simply points us to the fact that our conscience doesn't know what to do and thus need help. The second type of conscience is the opposite of what we call a doubtful conscience. This one, it is called a certain conscience. A certain conscience, quite the opposite of a doubtful conscience, is sure. Well, the opposite of doubt is certainty, being sure of something. So you are sure, you are aware that an action is either right or wrong. So that's simple. We could either, conscience could be doubtful or certain. But not all certain conscience. Now, sometimes it's like in an exam. You're taking the exams, you could be sure about your answers, but then your answers could still be right or wrong. What I'm saying is, sometimes we feel like mahal tayo or someone loves us, but sometimes it's just us. We would say, this is already the one, I am already sure. But the problem there is it really true? So there are two types of certainty. The first one is what we call a correct or a true conscience. A correct or a true conscience simply means that your decision or your judgment towards a moral act is correct or abides to what is objectively right. For example, a girl left her iPhone on the table in a cafeteria, and someone sees that she left her phone there, and that person sees it and then says, no one's looking around, I could simply get it and then go away, no one will know. But then if the conscience of that person's conscience tells that person that is wrong, you better return that to the owner. Well, the call of the conscience there is what we call a true or a correct conscience, because it abides or it is aligned to what is objectively right. Because taking something that is not yours is considered stealing. So that conscience judges that if that person takes that iPhone, then it's already considered a stealing. Well, quite the opposite. If something is true or correct, then you have an erroneous or a false conscience. An erroneous or a false conscience, it means that, it judges an action wrongly. But there are several ways to judge an action wrongly or wrongly judge an act. First is what we call this is a type of erroneous conscience. First one is what we call a lax conscience. What is a lax conscience? It is a kind of conscience wherein a person judges a thing as okay or as right, even though it is wrong. I'll give you an example. I remember a student before, I caught her cheating. And I asked her what's the reason for her to cheat. And then she said, "Sir, I don't think there's something wrong with cheating. Everyone does it. And what's wrong about it? Anyway, the subject does not mean anything to me. I'm not gonna be a mathematician someday, so it's okay to cheat." See, that student simply points out that because everyone is doing it, she doesn't have any real use for it, therefore cheating is not really wrong. So that is an example of what you call a lax conscience. Another example is, let's say, when someone is asked why he masturbates or commits premarital sex, oftentimes the answer is, well, because everyone does it. So, well, if one is trying to justify something that is wrong, he deemed that to be right, even though it's wrong, it's called a lax conscience. The second type of an erroneous conscience is what we call a scrupulous conscience. It's quite the opposite this time. This time, you judge something as a wrong act, even though there's nothing wrong with it. An example to this is when I met this old lady. I was a seminarian back then. That one time he asked me before the mass. He asked me, "Brother, I need to confess to Father." And I said, "The mass is about to start, so could that wait?" And he was like insisting, "But then I need to confess something to him because I'm I made a big sin last night. Today." I said, "What's that big sin?" So at the back of my head. But then she started to tell me what's the sin. "You know what, brother? I wasn't able to attend the mass before this one. I usually attend that in this mass because that's part of my devotion. That's part of my as a leader of this religious group, etc., etc." And then I asked, "There's nothing wrong with you missing that mass. Probably you overslept because you were tired last night. God wouldn't really count the number of masses that you'd attend." But then she said, "But then that's my devotion." This is an example of what we call a scrupulous conscience. She thinks that missing the first mass, even though she's still going to attend the second mass, is already a sin. But there's nothing wrong with it. You only need to attend one mass every Sunday. And doesn't mean that you attend 3 masses every Sunday. That makes you a better person. But still, that's good. However, missing one mass out of the 3 does not make you a bad person. The third type of a erroneous conscience is what we call a pericycle conscience. What do you mean by that? This time, it's a combination of a lax and a scrupulous conscience, wherein you think you have made a big sin or a really wrong thing, even though it's not, and you judge a thing, it's okay, even though it's completely wrong. An example to this is when a person would say it's okay that the government kill these drug addicts, execute people without any due process, but is very angry if that person, like for example, his grandson wasn't able to really complete the 9 days dawn masses, the 9 dawn masses. It's because it's part of their devotion. I'm not saying that you miss one dawn masses, but then I don't think that would make you completely a bad person if you miss one because you overslept, and then you might just take the one in the evening or simbang gabi. It's the same thing, it's the same mass. So sometimes these people have what you call a pericycle conscience. So there, you have different types or categories of conscience. Where does your conscience fall? Now, I have a question, a reflection question, or a challenging question. Remember, I've told you in the primacy of conscience that you are to follow your conscience at all times. The question is, what if you have an erroneous conscience. Will you still follow it? Goodbye. Toad will